Chapter 7. Pavel Petrovich Kirsanov was educated first at home, like his younger brother, and afterwards in the corps of pages. From childhood, he was distinguished by remarkable beauty. Moreover, he was self-confident, somewhat ironical, and had a rather biting humor. He couldn't fail to please. He began to be seen everywhere as soon as he had received his commission as an officer. He was much admired in society, and he indulged every whim, even every caprice and every folly, and gave himself airs. But that, too, was attractive in him. Women went out of their senses over him. Men called him a coxcomb, and were secretly jealous of him. He lived, as has been related already, in the same apartments as his brother, whom he loved sincerely, though he was not at all like him. Nikolai Petrovich was a little lame. He had small, pleasing features of a rather melancholy cast, small black eyes, and thin, soft hair. He liked being lazy, but he also liked reading and was timid in society. Pavel Petrovich did not spend a single evening at home, prided himself on his ease and audacity. He was just bringing gymnastics into fashion among young men in society, and had read in all some 5 or 6 French books. At 28, he was already a captain. A brilliant career awaited him. Suddenly, everything was changed. At that time, there was sometimes seen in Petersburg society a woman who has even yet not been forgotten, Princess R. She had a well-educated, well-bred, but rather stupid husband and no children. She used suddenly to go abroad and suddenly to return to Russia, and led an eccentric life in general. She had the reputation of being a frivolous coquette, abandoned herself eagerly to every sort of pleasure, danced to exhaustion, laughed and jested with young men whom she received in the dim light of her drawing room before dinner. While at night she wept and prayed, found no peace in anything, and often paced her room till morning, wringing her hands in anguish, or sat pale and chill over a psalter. Day came, and she was transformed again into a grand lady. Again she went out, laughed, chattered, and simply flung herself headlong into anything which could afford her the slightest distraction. She was marvelously well-proportioned, her hair colored like gold, and heavy as gold hung below her knees. But no one would have called her a beauty. In her whole face, the only good point was her eyes. And even her eyes weren't good. They were gray and not large. But their glance was swift and deep, unconcerned to the point of audacity, and thoughtful to the point of melancholy. An enigmatic glance. There was a light of something extraordinary in them, even while her tongue was lisping the emptiest of inanities. She dressed with elaborate care. Pavel Petrovich met her at a ball, danced a mazurka with her, in the course of which she didn't utter a single rational word, and fell passionately in love with her. Being accustomed to make conquests, in this instance too, he soon attained his object, but his easy success did not damp his ardor. On the contrary, he was in still more torturing, still closer bondage to this woman, in whom even at the very moment when she surrendered herself utterly, there seemed always something still mysterious and unattainable, to which none could penetrate. What was hidden in that soul, God knows. It seemed as though she were in the power of mysterious forces, incomprehensible even to herself. They seemed to play on her at will. Her intellect was not powerful enough to master their caprices. Her whole behavior presented a series of inconsistencies. The only letters which could have awakened her husband's just suspicions she wrote to a man who was almost a stranger to her, whilst her love had always an element of melancholy. With a man she had chosen as a lover, she ceased to laugh and to jest. She listened to him and gazed at him with a look of bewilderment. Sometimes, for the most part, suddenly, this bewilderment passed into chill horror. Her face took a wild, death-like expression. She locked herself up in her bedroom, and her maid, putting an ear to the keyhole, could hear her smothered sobs. More than once, as he went home after a tender interview, Kirsanov felt within him that heart-rending, bitter vexation which follows on a total failure. What more do I want? He asked himself, while his heart was heavy. He once gave her a ring with a sphinx engraved on the stone. What's that? She asked. A sphinx? Yes, he answered. And that sphinx is you. I? She queried, and slowly raising her enigmatical glance upon him. Do you know that's awfully flattering? She added, with a meaningless smile, while her eyes still kept the same strange look. Pavel Petrovich suffered even while Princess R loved him. But when she grew cold to him, and that happened rather quickly, he almost went out of his mind. He was on the rack, and he was jealous. He gave her no peace, followed her about everywhere. She grew sick of his pursuit of her, and she went abroad. He resigned his commission in spite of the entreaties of his friends and the exhortations of his superiors, and followed the princess. 4 years he spent in foreign countries, at one time pursuing her, at another time intentionally losing sight of her. He was ashamed of himself. He was disgusted with his own lack of spirit. But nothing availed. Her image, that incomprehensible, almost meaningless but bewitching image, was deeply rooted in his heart. At Baden, he once more regained his old footing with her. It seemed as though she had never loved him so passionately, but in a month, it was all at an end. The flame flickered up for the last time and went out forever. Foreseeing inevitable separation, he wanted at least to remain her friend, as though friendship with such a woman was possible. She secretly left Baden, and from that time steadily avoided Kirsanov. He returned to Russia and tried to live his former life again, but he couldn't get back into the old groove. He wandered from place to place like a man possessed. He still went into society. He still retained the habits of a man of the world. He could boast of 2 or 3 fresh conquests. But he no longer expected anything much of himself or of others. And he undertook nothing. He grew old and gray, spending all his evenings at the club, jaundiced and bored. And arguing in bachelor society became a necessity for him, a bad sign, as we all know. Marriage, of course, he didn't even think of. 10 years passed in this way. They passed by, colorless and fruitless, and quickly, fearfully quickly. Nowhere does time fly past as in Russia. In prison, they say it flies even faster. One day at dinner at the club, Pavel Petrovich heard of the death of the Princess R. She had died at Paris in a state bordering on insanity. He got up from the table, and a long time he paced about the rooms of the club, or stood stock still near the card players. But he didn't go home earlier than usual. Sometime later he received a packet addressed to him. In it was the ring he had given the princess. She had drawn lines in the shape of a cross over the Sphinx and sent him word that the solution of the enigma was the cross. This happened at the beginning of the year 1848, at the very time when Nikolai Petrovich came to Petersburg after the loss of his wife. Pavel Petrovich had scarcely seen his brother since the latter had settled in the country. The marriage of Nikolai Petrovich had coincided with the very first days of Pavel Petrovich's acquaintance with the princess. When he came back from abroad, he had gone to him with the intention of staying a couple of months with him, in sympathetic enjoyment of his happiness. But he had only succeeded in standing a week of it. The difference in the positions of the two brothers was too great. In 1848, this difference had grown less. Nikolai Petrovich had lost his wife. Pavel Petrovich had lost his memories. After the death of the princess, he tried not to think of her, but to Nikolai, there remained the sense of a well-spent life. His son was growing up under his eyes. Pavel, on the contrary, a solitary bachelor, was entering upon that indefinite twilight period of regrets that are akin to hopes, and hopes that are akin to regrets, when youth is over, while old age has not yet come. This time was harder for Pavel Petrovich than for another man. In losing his past, he lost everything. "I will not invite you to Mariino now," Nikolai Petrovich said to him one day. He had called his property by that name in honor of his wife. "You were bored there in my dear wife's time, and now I think you would be bored to death." "I was stupid and fidgety then," answered Pavel Petrovich. "Since then I have grown quieter, if not wiser. On the contrary, now, if you will let me, I am ready to settle with you for good." For all answer, Nikolai Petrovich embraced him. But a year and a half passed after this conversation before Pavel Petrovich made up his mind to carry out his intention. When he was once settled in the country, however, he didn't leave it, even during the 3 winters which Nikolai Petrovich spent in Petersburg with his son. He began to read, chiefly English. He arranged his whole life, roughly speaking, in the English style, rarely saw the neighbors, and only went out to the election of marshals, where he was generally silent, only occasionally annoying and alarming landowners of the old school by his liberal sallies and not associating with the representatives of the younger generation. Both the latter and the former considered him stuck-up, and both parties respected him for his fine aristocratic manners, for his reputation for successes in love, for the fact that he was very well dressed and always stayed in the best room in the best hotel, for the fact that he generally dined well and had once even dined with Wellington at Louis Philippe's table, for the fact that he always took everywhere with him a real silver dressing case and a portable bath, for the fact that he always smelt of some exceptionally good form scent, for the fact that he played whist in masterly fashion and always lost. And lastly, they respected him also for his incorruptible honesty. Ladies considered him enchantingly romantic, but he didn't cultivate ladies' acquaintance. "So you see, Yevgeny," observed Arkady as he finished his story, "how unjustly you judge of my uncle. To say nothing of his having more than once helped my father out of difficulties, given him all his money. The property, perhaps you don't know, wasn't divided. He's glad to help anyone. Among other things, he always sticks up for the peasants. It's true, when he talks to them, he frowns and sniffs eau de cologne." "His nerves, no doubt," put in Bazarov. "Perhaps, but his heart is very good, and he's far from being stupid. What useful advice he has given me, especially in regard to relations with women." "Aha! A scalded dog fears cold water, we know that." "In short," continued Arkady, "he's profoundly unhappy, believe me. It's a sin to despise him." "And who does despise him?" retorted Bazarov. "Still, I must say that a fellow who stakes his whole life on one card, a woman's love, and when that card fails, turns sour, and lets himself go till he's fit for nothing, is not a man, but a male. You say he's unhappy. You ought to know best. To be sure, he's not got rid of all his fads. I'm convinced that he solemnly imagines himself a superior creature because he reads that wretched Galignani and once a month saves a peasant from a flogging." "But remember his education, the age in which he grew up," observed Arkady. "Education?" broke in Bazarov. "Every man must educate himself, just as I've done, for instance. And as for the age, why should I depend on it? Let it rather depend on me. No, my dear fellow, that's all shallowness, want of backbone. And what stuff it all is about these mysterious relations between a man and woman. We physiologists know what these relations are. You study the anatomy of the eye. Where does the enigmatical glance you talk about come in there? That's all romantic, nonsensical, aesthetic rot. We'd much better go and look at the beetle." and the two friends went off to Bazarov's room, which was already pervaded by a sort of medico-surgical odor mingled with the smell of cheap tobacco. Chapter 8. Pavel Petrovich did not long remain present at his brother's interview with his steward, a tall, thin man with a sweet, consumptive voice and knavish eyes, who to all Nikolai Petrovich's remarks answered, "Certainly, sir," and tried to make the peasants out to be thieves and drunkards. The estate had only recently been put onto the new reformed system, and the new mechanism worked, creaking like an ungreased wheel, warping and cracking like homemade furniture of unseasoned wood. Nikolai Petrovich didn't lose heart, but often he sighed and was gloomy. He felt that the thing could not go on without money, and his money was almost spent. Arkady had spoken the truth. Pavel Petrovich had more than once helped his brother, more than once seeing him struggling and cudgeling his brains at a loss which way to turn. Pavel Petrovich moved deliberately to the window, and with his hands thrust into his pockets, muttered between his teeth, "Mais je puis vous donner de l'argent," and gave him money. But today he had none himself, and he preferred to go away. The petty details of agricultural management worried him. Besides, it constantly struck him that Nikolai Petrovich, for all his zeal and industry, did not set about things in the right way, though he wouldn't have been able to point out precisely where Nikolai Petrovich's mistake lay. "My brother's not practical enough," he reasoned to himself. "They impose upon him." Nikolai Petrovich, on the other hand, had the highest opinion of Pavel Petrovich's practical ability, and always asked his advice. "I'm a soft, weak fellow. I've spent my life in the wilds," he used to say. "While you haven't seen so much of the world for nothing. You see through people. You have an eagle eye." In answer to which Pavel Petrovich only turned away, but didn't contradict his brother. Leaving Nikolai Petrovich in his study, he walked along the corridor which separated the front part of the house from the back. When he had reached a low door, he stopped in hesitation, then, pulling his mustaches, he knocked at it. "Who's there? Come in," sounded Fenichka's voice. "It's I," said Pavel Petrovich, and he opened the door. Fenichka jumped up from the chair on which she was sitting with her baby, and giving him into the arms of a girl who had once carried him out of the room, she put straight her kerchief hastily. "Pardon me if I disturbed you," began Pavel Petrovich, not looking at her. "I only wanted to ask you. They are sending into the town today, I think. Please let them buy me some green tea." "Certainly," answered Fenichka. "How much do you desire them to buy?" "Oh, £1/2 will be enough, I imagine." "You have made a change here, I see," he added, with a rapid glance around him, which glided over Fenichka's face, too. "The curtains here," he explained, seeing she didn't understand him. "Oh, yes, the curtains. Nikolai Petrovich was so good as to make me a present of them. But they have been put up a long while now." "Yes, and it's a long while since I have been to see you. Now it is very nice here." "Thanks to Nikolai Petrovich's kindness," murmured Fenichka. "You are more comfortable here than in the little lodge you used to have?" inquired Pavel Petrovich urbanely, but without the slightest smile. "Certainly, it's more comfortable." "Who has been put in your place now?" "The laundry maids are there now." "Ah." Pavel Petrovich was silent. "Now he is going," thought Fenichka, but he did not go, and she stood before him motionless. "What did you send your little one away for?" said Pavel Petrovich at last. "I love children. Let me see him." Fenichka blushed all over with confusion and delight. She was afraid of Pavel Petrovich. He had scarcely ever spoken to her. "Dunyasha," she called, "will you bring Mitya, please?" Fenichka did not treat anyone in the house familiarly. But wait a minute, he must have a frock on. Fenichka was going towards the door. That doesn't matter, remarked Pavel Petrovich. I will be back directly, answered Fenichka, and she went out quickly. Pavel Petrovich was left alone, and he looked around this time with special attention. The small, low-pitched room in which he found himself was very clean and snug. It smelled of the freshly painted floor and of chamomile. Along the walls stood chairs with lyre-shaped backs bought by the late general on his campaign in Poland. In one corner was a little bedstead under a muslin canopy beside an iron-clamped chest with a convex lid. In the opposite corner, a little lamp was burning before a big, dark picture of St. Nikolai the Wonderworker. A tiny porcelain egg hung by a red ribbon from the protruding gold halo down to the saint's breast. By the windows, greenish glass jars of last year's jam carefully tied down could be seen. On their paper covers, Fenichka herself had written in big letters, "Gooseberry." Nikolai Petrovich was particularly fond of that preserve. On a long cord from the ceiling, a cage hung with a short-tailed siskin in it. He was constantly chirping and hopping about. The cage was constantly shaking and swinging, while hemp seeds fell with a light tap onto the floor. On the wall, just above a small chest of drawers, hung some rather bad photographs of Nikolai Petrovich in various attitudes, taken by an itinerant photographer. There, too, hung a photograph of Fenichka herself, which was an absolute failure. It was an eyeless face wearing a forced smile in a dingy frame. Nothing more could be made out. While above Fenichka, General Yermolov, in a Circassian cloak, scowled menacingly upon the Caucasian mountains in the distance, from beneath a little silk shoe for pins which fell right onto his brows. 5 minutes passed. Bustling and whispering could be heard in the next room. Pavel Petrovich took up from the chest of drawers a greasy book, an odd volume of Masalski's Musketeer, and turned over a few pages. The door opened, and Fenichka came in with Mitya in her arms. She had put on him a little red smock with embroidery on the collar, had combed his hair, and washed his face. He was breathing heavily, his whole body working, and his little hands waving in the air, as is the way with all healthy babies. But his smart smock obviously impressed him. An expression of delight was reflected in every part of his little fat person. Fenichka had put her own hair, too, in order, and had arranged her kerchief. But she might well have remained as she was. And really, is there anything in the world more captivating than a beautiful young mother with a healthy baby in her arms? "What a chubby fellow," said Pavel Petrovich graciously, and he tickled Mitya's little double chin with the tapering nail of his forefinger. The baby stared at the siskin and chuckled. "That's Uncle," said Fenichka, bending her face down to him and slightly rocking him, while Dunyasha quietly set in the window a smoldering, perfumed stick, putting a halfpenny under it. "How many months old is he?" asked Pavel Petrovich. 6 months. It will soon be 7 on the 11th. "Isn't it 8, Fedosia Nikolaevna?" put in Dunyasha with some timidity. "No, 7. What an idea." The baby chuckled again, stared at the chest, and suddenly caught hold of his mother's nose and mouth with all his 5 little fingers. "Saucy mite," said Fenichka, not drawing her face away. "He's like my brother," observed Pavel Petrovich. "Who else should he be like?" thought Fenichka. "Yes," continued Pavel Petrovich, as though speaking to himself, "there's an unmistakable likeness." He looked attentively, almost mournfully, at Fenichka. "That's Uncle," she repeated in a whisper this time. "Ah, Pavel, so you're here," was heard suddenly the voice of Nikolai Petrovich. Pavel Petrovich turned hurriedly round, frowning, but his brother looked at him with such delight, such gratitude, that he couldn't help responding to his smile. "You've a splendid little cherub," he said, and looking at his watch, "I came in here to speak about some tea." And assuming an expression of indifference, Pavel Petrovich went out of the room. Did he come of himself? Nikolai Petrovich asked Fenichka. Yes, he knocked and came in. Well, and has Arkasha been in to see you again? No. Hadn't I better move into the lodge, Nikolai Petrovich? Why so? I wonder whether it wouldn't be best just for the first. No, Nikolai Petrovich brought out hesitatingly, rubbing his forehead. We ought to have done it before. How are you, Fatty? He said, suddenly brightening and going up to the baby. He kissed him on the cheek. Then he bent a little and pressed his lips to Fenichka's hand, which lay white as milk upon Mitya's little red smock. Nikolai Petrovich, what are you doing? She whispered, dropping her eyes, then slowly raising them. Very charming was the expression of her eyes when she peeped, as it were, from under her lids and smiled tenderly and a little foolishly. Nikolai Petrovich had made Fenichka's acquaintance in the following manner. He had once happened 3 years before to stay a night at an inn in a remote district town. He was agreeably struck by the cleanness of the room assigned to him, the freshness of the bed linen. Surely the woman of the house must be a German, was the idea that occurred to him. But she proved to be a Russian, a woman of about 50, neatly dressed, of a good-looking, sensible countenance and discreet speech. He entered into conversation with her at tea. He liked her very much. Nikolai Petrovich had at that time only just moved into his new home, and not wishing to keep serfs in the house, he was on the lookout for wage servants. The woman of the inn on her side complained of the small number of visitors to the town and the hard time. He proposed to her to come into his house in the capacity of housekeeper. She consented. Her husband had long been dead, leaving her an only daughter, Fenichka. Within a fortnight, Arina Savishna, that was the new housekeeper's name, arrived with her daughter at Mariino and installed herself in the little lodge. Nikolai Petrovich's choice proved a successful one. Arina brought order into the household. As for Fenichka, who was at that time 17, no one spoke of her, and scarcely anyone saw her. She lived quietly and sedately, and only on Sundays Nikolai Petrovich noticed in the church, somewhere in a side place, the delicate profile of her white face. More than a year passed thus. One morning, Arina came into his study, and bowing low as usual, she asked him if he could do anything for her daughter, who had got a spark from the stove in her eye. Nikolai Petrovich, like all stay-at-home people, had studied doctoring and even compiled a homeopathic guide. He had once told Arina to bring the patient to him. Fenichka was much frightened when she heard the master had sent for her. However, she followed her mother. Nikolai Petrovich led her to the window and took her head in his 2 hands. After thoroughly examining her red and swollen eye, he prescribed a fomentation, which he made up himself at once, and tearing his handkerchief in pieces, he showed her how it ought to be applied. Fenichka listened to all he had to say and then was going. "Kiss the master's hand, silly girl," said Arina. Nikolai Petrovich did not give her his hand, and in confusion himself kissed her bent head on the parting of her hair. Fenichka's eye was soon well again. But the impression she had made on Nikolai Petrovich didn't pass away so quickly. He was forever haunted by that pure, delicate, timidly raised face. He felt on the palms of his hands that soft hair and saw those innocent, slightly parted lips through which pearly teeth gleamed with moist brilliance in the sunshine. He began to watch her with great attention in church and tried to get into conversation with her. At first she was shy of him, and one day, meeting him at the approach of evening in a narrow footpath through a field of rye, she ran into the tall, thick rye, overgrown with cornflowers and wormwood, so as not to meet him face to face. He caught sight of her little head through a golden network of ears of rye, from which she was peeping out like a little animal, and called affectionately to her, "Good evening, Fenichka, I don't bite." "Good evening," she whispered, not coming out of her ambush. By degrees, she began to be more at home with him. but was still shy in his presence when suddenly her mother, Arina, died of cholera. What was to become of Fenichka? She inherited from her mother a love for order, regularity, and respectability. But she was so young, so alone. Nikolai Petrovich was himself so good and considerate. It's needless to relate the rest. "So, my brother came in to see you?" Nikolai Petrovich questioned her. "He knocked and came in?" "Yes." "Well, that's a good thing. Let me give Mitya a swing." And Nikolai Petrovich began tossing him almost up to the ceiling, to the huge delight of the baby, and to the considerable uneasiness of the mother, who every time he flew up stretched her arms up towards his little bare legs. Pavel Petrovich went back to his artistic study, with its walls covered with handsome bluish-gray hangings, with weapons hanging upon a variegated Persian rug nailed to the wall, with walnut furniture upholstered in dark green velveteen, with a Renaissance bookcase of old black oak, with bronze statuettes on the magnificent writing table, with an open hearth. He threw himself on the sofa, clasped his hand behind his head, and remained without moving, looking with a face almost of despair at the ceiling. Whether he wanted to hide from the very walls that which was reflected in his face, or for some other reason, he got up, drew the heavy window curtains, and again threw himself on the sofa. Chapter 9. On the same day, Bazarov made acquaintance with Fenichka. He was walking with Arkady in the garden and explaining to him why some of the trees, especially the oaks, hadn't done well. "You ought to have planted silver poplars here by preference, and spruce firs, and perhaps limes, giving them some loam. The arbor there has done well," he added, "because it's acacia and lilac. They're accommodating good fellows, those trees. They don't want much care, but there's someone in here." In the arbor was sitting Fenichka, with Dunyasha and Mitya. Bazarov stood still, while Arkady nodded to Fenichka like an old friend. "Who's that?" Bazarov asked him as soon as they had passed by. "What a pretty girl." "Whom are you speaking of?" "You know, only one of them was pretty." Arkady, not without embarrassment, explained to him briefly who Fenichka was. "Aha!" commented Bazarov. "Your father's got good taste, one can see. I like him, your father, aye, he's a jolly fellow. We must make friends, though," he added, and turned back towards the arbor. "Yevgeny," Arkady cried after him in dismay, "mind what you are about, for mercy's sake." "Don't worry yourself," said Bazarov. "I know how to behave myself. I'm not a booby." Going up to Fenichka, he took off his cap. "Allow me to introduce myself," he began with a polite bow. "I'm a harmless person, and a friend of Arkady Nikolaevич's." Fenichka got up from the garden seat and looked at him without speaking. "What a splendid baby," continued Bazarov. "Don't be uneasy, my praises have never brought ill luck yet. Why is it his cheeks are so flushed? Is he cutting his teeth?" "Yes," said Fenichka. "He has cut 4 teeth already, and now the gums are swollen again." "Show me, and don't be afraid, I'm a doctor." Bazarov took the baby up in his arms, and to the great astonishment both of Fenichka and Dunyasha, the child made no resistance, and was not frightened. I see. It's nothing. Everything's as it should be. You will have a good set of teeth. If anything goes wrong, tell me. And are you quite well yourself?" "Quite, thank God." "Thank God indeed. That's the great thing. And you?" he added, turning to Dunyasha. Dunyasha, a girl very prim in the master's house and a romp outside the gates, only giggled in answer. "Well, that's all right. Here's your gallant fellow." Fenichka received the baby in her arms. "How good he was with you," she commented in an undertone. Children are always good with me, answered Bazarov. I have a way with them. Children know who love them, remarked Dunyasha. Yes, they certainly do, Fenichka said. Why, Mitya will not go to some people for anything. Will he come to me? Asked Arkady, who, after standing in the distance for some time, had gone up to the arbor. He tried to entice Mitya to come to him, but Mitya threw his head back and screamed, to Fenichka's great confusion. Another day, when he's had time to get used to me, said Arkady indulgently. And the two friends walked away. What's her name? Asked Bazarov. Fenichka, Fedosia, answered Arkady. And her father's name? One must know that too. Nikolaevna. Bene. What I like in her is that she's not too embarrassed. Some people, I suppose, would think ill of her for it. What nonsense. What is there to embarrass her? She's a mother. She's all right. She's all right, observed Arkady. But my father. And he's right too, put in Bazarov. Well, no, I don't think so. I suppose an extra heir's not to your liking? I wonder you're not ashamed to attribute such ideas to me, retorted Arkady hotly. I don't consider my father wrong from that point of view. I think he ought to marry her. Hoity-toity, responded Bazarov tranquilly. What magnanimous fellows we are. You still attach significance to marriage. I didn't expect that of you. The friends walked a few paces in silence. I have looked at all your father's establishment, Bazarov began again. The cattle are inferior. The horses are broken down. The buildings aren't up to much, and the workmen look confirmed loafers. While the superintendent is either a fool or a knave, I haven't quite found out which yet. You are rather hard on everything today, Yevgeny Vasilyevich. And the dear good peasants are taking your father into a dead certainty. You know the Russian proverb, the Russian peasant will cheat God himself. I begin to agree with my uncle, remarked Arkady. You certainly have a poor opinion of Russians. As though that mattered. The only good point in a Russian is his having the lowest possible opinion of himself. What does matter is that 2 and 2 make 4, and the rest is all foolery. And is nature foolery? Said Arkady, looking pensively at the bright-colored fields in the distance, in the beautiful soft light of the sun, which was not yet high up in the sky. Nature, too, is foolery, in the sense you understand. Nature's not a temple, but a workshop, and man's the workman in it. At that instant, the long-drawn notes of a violoncello floated after them from the house. Someone was playing Schubert's Expectation with much feeling, though with an untrained hand, and the melody flowed with honey sweetness through the air. What's that? Cried Bazarov in amazement. It's my father. Your father plays the violoncello? Yes. And how old is your father? 44. Bazarov suddenly burst into a roar of laughter. What are you laughing at? Upon my word, a man of 44, a paterfamilias in this out-of-the-way district, playing on the violoncello. Bazarov went on laughing. But much as he revered his master, this time Arkady didn't even smile. Chapter 10. About a fortnight passed by. Life at Marino went on its accustomed course, while Arkady was lazy and enjoyed himself, and Bazarov worked. Everyone in the house had grown used to him, to his careless manners, and his curt and abrupt speeches. Fenichka in particular was so far at home with him that one night she sent to wake him up. Mitya had had convulsions, and he had gone, and half joking, half yawning as usual, he stayed 2 hours with her and relieved the child. On the other hand, Pavel Petrovitch had grown to detest Bazarov with all the strength of his soul. He regarded him as stuck-up, impudent, cynical, and vulgar. He suspected that Bazarov had no respect for him, that he had all but a contempt for him. Him, Pavel Kirsanov. Nikolai Petrovich was rather afraid of the young nihilist, and was doubtful whether his influence over Arkady was for the good. But he was glad to listen to him, and was glad to be present at his scientific and chemical experiments. Bazarov had brought with him a microscope, and busied himself for hours together with it. The servants, too, took to him, though he made fun of them. They felt all the same that he was one of themselves, not a master. Dunyasha was always ready to giggle with him, and used to cast significant and stealthy glances at him when she skipped by like a rabbit. Pyotr, a man vain and stupid to the last degree, forever wearing an affected frown on his brow, a man whose whole merit consisted in the fact that he looked civil, could spell out a page of reading, and was diligent in brushing his coat, even he smirked and brightened up whenever Bazarov paid him any attention. The boys on the farm simply ran after the doctor like puppies. The old man Prokofych was the only one who did not like him. He handed him the dishes at table with a surly face, called him a butcher and an upstart, and declared that with his great whiskers he looked like a pig in a sty. Prokofych, in his own way, was quite as much of an aristocrat as Pavel Petrovich. The best days of the year had come, the first days of June. The weather kept splendidly fine. In the distance, it is true, the cholera was threatening, but the inhabitants of that province had had time to get used to its visits. Bazarov used to get up very early and go out for 2 or 3 miles, not for a walk, he couldn't bear walking without an object, but to collect specimens of plants and insects. Sometimes he took Arkady with him. On the way home, an argument usually sprang up, and Arkady was usually vanquished in it, though he said more than his companion. One day, they had lingered rather late. Nikolai Petrovich went to meet them in the garden, and as he reached the arbor, he suddenly heard the quick steps and voices of the 2 young men. They were walking on the other side of the arbor and couldn't see him. "You don't know my father well enough," said Arkady. "Your father's a nice chap," said Bazarov, "but he's behind the times. His day is done." Nikolai Petrovich listened intently. Arkady made no answer. The man whose day was done remained 2 minutes motionless and stole slowly home. "The day before yesterday, I saw him reading Pushkin," Bazarov was continuing meanwhile. "Explain to him, please, that that's no earthly use. He's not a boy, you know. It's time to throw up that rubbish. And what an idea to be a romantic at this time of day. Give him something sensible to read." "What ought I to give him?" asked Arkady. "Oh, I think Büchner's Stoff und Kraft to begin with." "I think so too," observed Arkady approvingly. "Stoff und Kraft is written in popular language." "So it seems," Nikolai Petrovich said the same day after dinner to his brother as he sat in his study, "you and I are behind the times. Our day's over. Well, perhaps Bazarov is right. But one thing, I confess, makes me feel sore. I did so hope precisely now to get onto such close, intimate terms with Arkady. And it turns out I'm left behind, and he has gone forward, and we can't understand one another." "How has he gone forward? And in what way is he so superior to us already?" cried Pavel Petrovich impatiently. "It's that high and mighty gentleman, that nihilist, who's knocked all that into his head. I hate that doctor fellow. In my opinion, he's simply a quack. I'm convinced, for all his tadpoles, he's not got very far even in medicine." "No, brother, you mustn't say that. Bazarov is clever and knows his subject. And his conceit's something revolting." Pavel Petrovich broke in again. "Yes," observed Nikolai Petrovich, "he is conceited, but there's no doing without that, it seems. Only that's what I did not take into account. I thought I was doing everything to keep up with the times. I have started a model farm. I have done well by the peasants, so that I am positively called a red radical all over the province. I read, I study, I try in every way to keep abreast with the requirements of the day. And they say my day's over. And brother, I begin to think that it is. Why so? I'll tell you why. This morning I was sitting reading Pushkin. I remember it happened to be the gypsies. All of a sudden Arkady came up to me and without speaking, with such a kindly compassion on his face, as gently as if I were a baby, took the book away from me and laid another before me, a German book, smiled and went away, carrying Pushkin off with him. Upon my word, what book did he give you? This one here. And Nikolai Petrovich pulled the famous treatise of Büchner in the 9th edition out of his coat-tail pocket. Pavel Petrovich turned it over in his hands. He growled. Arkady Nikolaevich is taking your education in hand. Well, did you try reading it? Yes, I tried it. Well, what did you think of it? Either I'm stupid or it's all nonsense. I must be stupid, I suppose. Haven't you forgotten your German? Queried Pavel Petrovich. Oh, I understand the German. Pavel Petrovich again turned the book over in his hands and glanced from under his brows at his brother. Both were silent. Oh, by the way, began Nikolai Petrovich, obviously wishing to change the subject, I've got a letter from Kolyazin. Matveyevich? Yes, he has come to inspect the province. He's quite a big wig now, and writes to me that, as a relation, he should like to see us again, and invites you and me and Arkady to the town. Are you going? Asked Pavel Petrovich. No. Are you? No, I shan't go either. Much object there would be in dragging oneself over 40 miles on a wild goose chase. Mathieu wants to show himself in all his glory. Damn him. He will have the whole province doing him homage. He can get on without the likes of us. A grand dignity, indeed, a privy councillor. If I had stayed in the service, if I had trudged on in official harness, I should have been a general adjutant by now. Besides, you and I are behind the times, you know. Yes, brother, it's time, it seems, to order a coffin and cross one's arms on one's breast, remarked Nikolai Petrovich with a sigh. Well, I'm not going to give in quite so soon, muttered his brother. I've got a tussle with that doctor fellow before me. I feel sure of that. A tussle came off that same day at evening tea. Pavel Petrovich came into the drawing room, all ready for the fray, irritable and determined. He was only waiting for an excuse to fall upon the enemy, but for a long while an excuse did not present itself. As a rule, Bazarov said little in the presence of the old Kirsanovs, that was how he spoke of the brothers. And that evening he felt out of humor and drank off cup after cup of tea without a word. Pavel Petrovich was all aflame with impatience. His wishes were fulfilled at last. The conversation turned on one of the neighboring landowners. Rotten aristocratic snob, observed Bazarov indifferently. He had met him in Petersburg. Allow me to ask you, began Pavel Petrovich, and his lips were trembling. According to your ideas, have the words rotten and aristocrat the same meaning? I said aristocratic snob, replied Bazarov, lazily swallowing a sip of tea. Precisely so, but I imagine you have the same opinion of aristocrats as of aristocratic snobs. I think it my duty to inform you that I do not share that opinion. I venture to assert that everyone knows me for a man of liberal ideas and devoted to progress. But exactly for that reason, I respect aristocrats, real aristocrats. Kindly remember, sir. At these words, Bazarov lifted his eyes and looked at Pavel Petrovich. Kindly remember, sir, he repeated with acrimony, the English aristocracy. They do not abate one iota of their rights, and for that reason they respect the rights of others. They demand the performance of what is due to them, and for that reason they perform their own duties. The aristocracy has given freedom to England and maintains it for her. We've heard that story a good many times, replied Bazarov. But what are you trying to prove by that? I am trying to prove by that, sir. When Pavel Petrovich was angry, he intentionally clipped his words in this way, though of course he knew very well that such forms are not strictly grammatical. In this fashionable whim could be discerned a survival of the habits of the times of Alexander. The exquisites of those days, on the rare occasions when they spoke their own language, made use of such slipshod forms, as much as to say, we of course are born Russians. At the same time, we are great swells who are at liberty to neglect the rules of scholars. I am trying to prove by that, sir, that without the sense of personal dignity, without self-respect, and these two sentiments are well developed in the aristocrat, there is no secure foundation for the social bien public, the social fabric. Personal character, sir, that is the chief thing. A man's personal character must be firm as a rock, since everything is built on it. I am very well aware, for instance, that you are pleased to consider my habits, my dress, my refinements, in fact, ridiculous. But all that proceeds from a sense of self-respect, from a sense of duty, yes, indeed, of duty. I live in the country, in the wilds, but I will not lower myself. I respect the dignity of man in myself. Let me ask you, Pavel Petrovich, commented Bazarov. You respect yourself and sit with your hands folded. What sort of benefit does that do to the bien public? If you didn't respect yourself, you'd do just the same. Pavel Petrovich turned white. That's a different question. It's absolutely unnecessary for me to explain to you now why I sit with folded hands, as you are pleased to express yourself. I wish only to tell you that aristocracy is a principle, and in our days none but immoral or silly people can live without principles. I said that to Arkady the day after he came home, and I repeat it now. Isn't it so, Nikolai? Nikolai Petrovich nodded his head. Aristocracy, liberalism, progress, principles, Bazarov was saying meanwhile. If you think of it, what a lot of foreign and useless words. To a Russian, they're good for nothing. What is good for something, according to you? If we listen to you, we shall find ourselves outside humanity, outside its laws. Come, the logic of history demands... But what's that logic to us? We can get on without that, too. How do you mean? Why, this. You don't need logic, I hope, to put a bit of bread in your mouth when you're hungry. What's the object of these abstractions to us? Pavel Petrovich raised his hands in horror. I don't understand you after that. You insult the Russian people. I don't understand how it's possible not to acknowledge principles, rules. By virtue of what do you act, then? I've told you already, Uncle, that we don't accept any authorities, put in Arkady. We act by virtue of what we recognize as beneficial, observed Bazarov. At the present time, negation is the most beneficial of all, and we deny everything? Everything. What, not only art and poetry, but even, horrible to say, everything, repeated Bazarov, with indescribable composure. Pavel Petrovich stared at him. He had not expected this, while Arkady fairly blushed with delight. Allow me, began Nikolai Petrovich. You deny everything, or, speaking more precisely, you destroy everything. But one must construct too, you know. That's not our business now. The ground wants clearing first. The present condition of the people requires it, added Arkady with dignity. We are bound to carry out these requirements. We have no right to yield to the satisfaction of our personal egoism. This last phrase obviously displeased Bazarov. There was a flavor of philosophy, that is to say, romanticism about it. For Bazarov called philosophy, too, romanticism, but he did not think it necessary to correct his young disciple. No, cried Pavel Petrovich with sudden energy. I'm not willing to believe that you, young men, know the Russian people really, that you are the representatives of their requirements, their efforts. No, the Russian people is not what you imagined. tradition it holds sacred. It is a patriarchal people. It cannot live without faith. I'm not going to dispute that, Bazarov interrupted. I'm even ready to agree that in that you're right. But if I am right, and all the same, that proves nothing. It just proves nothing, repeated Arkady, with the confidence of a practiced chess player who has foreseen an apparently dangerous move on the part of his adversary, and so is not at all taken aback by it. How does it prove nothing? Muttered Pavel Petrovich, astounded. You must be going against the people, then. And what if we are? Shouted Bazarov. The people imagine that when it thunders, the prophet Ilya is riding across the sky in his chariot. What then, are we to agree with them? Besides, the people's Russian. But am I not Russian too? No, you are not Russian. After all you have just been saying, I can't acknowledge you as Russian. My grandfather plowed the land, answered Bazarov with haughty pride. Ask any one of your peasants which of us, you or me, he'd more readily acknowledge as a fellow countryman. You don't even know how to talk to them, while you talk to him and despise him at the same time. Well, suppose he deserves contempt. You find fault with my attitude, but how do you know that I have got it by chance, that it's not a product of that very national spirit in the name of which you wage war on it? What an idea! Much use in nihilists. Whether they're of use or not, it's not for us to decide. Or even you suppose you're not a useless person. Gentlemen, no personalities, please, cried Nikolai Petrovich, getting up. Pavel Petrovich smiled, and laying his hand on his brother's shoulder, forced him to sit down again. Don't be uneasy, he said. I shall not forget myself. Just through that sense of dignity which is made fun of so mercilessly by our friend the doctor. Let me ask, he resumed, turning again to Bazarov. You suppose, possibly, that your doctrine is a novelty. That is quite a mistake. The materialism you advocate has been more than once in vogue already and has always proved insufficient. A foreign word again, broke in Bazarov. He was beginning to feel vicious, and his face assumed a peculiar coarse, coppery hue. In the first place, we advocate nothing. That's not our way. What do you do, then? I'll tell you what we do. Not long ago, we used to say that our officials took bribes, that we had no roads, no commerce, no real justice. Oh, I see, you are reformers. That's what that's called, I fancy. I, too, should agree to many of your reforms, but then we suspected that talk, perpetual talk and nothing but talk, about our social diseases was not worthwhile, that it all led to nothing but superficiality and pedantry. We saw that our leading men, so-called advanced people and reformers, are no good, that we busy ourselves over foolery, talk rubbish about art, unconscious creativeness, parliamentarism, trial by jury, and the deuce knows what all. While all the while it's a question of getting bread to eat. While we're stifling under the grossest superstition, while all our enterprises come to grief, simply because there aren't honest men enough to carry them on. While the very emancipation our government's busy upon will hardly come to any good because peasants are glad to rob even themselves to get drunk at the gin shop. Yes, interposed Pavel Petrovich. Yes, you were convinced of all this and decided not to undertake anything seriously yourselves. We decided not to undertake anything, repeated Bazarov grimly. He suddenly felt vexed with himself for having, without reason, been so expansive before this gentleman. But to confine yourselves to abuse? To confine ourselves to abuse. And that is called nihilism? And that's called nihilism, Bazarov repeated again, this time with peculiar rudeness. Pavel Petrovich puckered up his face a little. So that's it, he observed in a strangely composed voice. Nihilism is to cure all our woes, and you are our heroes and saviors. But why do you abuse others, those reformers even? Don't you do as much talking as everyone else? Whatever faults we have, We do not err in that way, Bazarov muttered between his teeth. What then? Do you act, or what? Are you preparing for action? Bazarov made no answer. Something like a tremor passed over Pavel Petrovich, but he at once regained control of himself. Action, destruction, he went on. But how destroy without even knowing why? We shall destroy because we are a force, observed Arkady. Pavel Petrovich looked at his nephew and laughed. Yes, a force is not to be called to account, said Arkady, drawing himself up. Unhappy boy, wailed Pavel Petrovich. He was positively incapable of maintaining his firm demeanor any longer. If you could only realize what it is you are doing for your country. No, it's enough to try the patience of an angel. Force. There's force in the savage Kalmyk, in the Mongolian, but what is it to us? What is precious to us is civilization. Yes, sir, its fruits are precious to us. And don't tell me those fruits are worthless. Le poorest dauber, un barbouilleur, the man who plays dance music for 5 kopecks an evening, is of more use than you because they are the representatives of civilization and not of brute Mongolian force. You fancy yourselves advanced people, and all the while you are only fit for the Kalmyk's hovel. Force. And recollect, you forcible gentlemen, that you're only 4 men and a half, and the others are millions who won't let you trample their sacred traditions underfoot, who will crush you and walk over you. If we're crushed, serves us right, observed Bazarov. But that's an open question. We are not so few as you suppose. What? You seriously suppose you will come to terms with a whole people? All Moscow was burnt down, you know, by a Kopek dip, answered Bazarov. Yes, first a pride almost satanic, then ridicule. That's what it is attracts the young. That's what gains an ascendancy over the inexperienced hearts of boys. Here's one of them sitting beside you, ready to worship the ground under your feet. Look at him. Arkady turned away and frowned. And this plague has spread far already. I have been told that in Rome our artists never set foot in the Vatican. Raphael they regard as almost a fool because, if you please, he's an authority, while they're all the while most disgustingly sterile and unsuccessful, men whose imagination does not soar beyond girls at a fountain, however they try. And the girls even out of drawing. They are fine fellows to your mind, are they not? To my mind, retorted Bazarov, Raphael's not worth a copper kopek, and they're no better than he. Bravo! Listen, Arkady, that's how young men of today ought to express themselves. And if you come to think of it, how could they fail to follow you? In old days, young men had to study. They didn't want to be called dunces, so they had to work hard whether they liked it or not. But now they need only say, everything in the world is foolery, and the trick's done. Young men are delighted. And to be sure, they were simply geese before, and now they have suddenly turned nihilists. Your praiseworthy sense of personal dignity has given way, remarked Bazarov phlegmatically, while Arkady was hot all over and his eyes were flashing. Our argument has gone too far. It's better to cut it short, I think. I shall be quite ready to agree with you, he added, getting up, when you bring forward a single institution in our present mode of life, in family or in social life, which doesn't call for complete and unqualified destruction. I will bring forward millions of such institutions, cried Pavel Petrovich. Millions? Well, the Mir, for instance. A cold smile curved Bazarov's lips. Well, as regards the Mir, he commented, you had better talk to your brother. He has seen by now, I should fancy, what sort of thing the Mir is, in fact. Its common guarantee, its sobriety, and other features of the kind. The family, then. The family, as it exists among our peasants, cried Pavel Petrovich. And that subject, too, I imagine, it will be better for yourselves not to go into in detail. Don't you realize all the advantages of the head of the family choosing his daughters-in-law? Take my advice, Pavel Petrovich. Allow yourself 2 days to think about it. You're not likely to find anything on the spot. Go through all our classes and think well over each while I and Arkady will go on turning everything into ridicule, broke in Pavel Petrovich. No, we'll go on dissecting frogs. Come, Arkady. Goodbye for the present, gentlemen. The two friends walked off. The brothers were left alone, and at first they only looked at one another. So, that, began Pavel Petrovich, so that's what our young men of this generation are. They are like that. Our successors. Our successors, repeated Nikolai Petrovich with a dejected smile. He had been sitting on thorns all through the argument and had done nothing but glance stealthily with a sore heart at Arkady. Do you know what I was reminded of, brother? I once had a dispute with our poor mother. She stormed and wouldn't listen to me. At last I said to her, "Of course you can't understand me. We belong," I said, "to 2 different generations." She was dreadfully offended. Well, I thought, there's no help for it. It's a bitter pill, but she has to swallow it. You see, now our turn has come, and our successors can say to us, "You are not of our generation. Swallow your pill." You are beyond everything in your generosity and modesty, replied Pavel Petrovich. I am convinced, on the contrary, that you and I are far more in the right than these young gentlemen, though we do perhaps express ourselves in old-fashioned language, vieilli, and have not the same insolent conceit. And the swagger of the young men nowadays. You ask one, "Do you take red wine or white?" "It is my custom to prefer red," he answers in a deep bass, with a face as solemn as if the whole universe had its eyes on him at that instant. "Do you care for any more tea?" asked Fianichka, putting her head in at the door. She hadn't been able to make up her mind to come into the drawing room while there was the sound of voices in dispute there. "No, you can tell them to take the samovar," answered Nikolai Petrovich, and he got up to meet her. Pavel Petrovich said bonsoir to him abruptly and went away to his study.